Hello, and welcome to episode 21 of Sarastro's Star Wars painting series. In this episode, we're going to paint the Rebel Saboteurs from Fantasy Flight Games' Star Wars Imperial Assault. For this tutorial, I will mostly be selecting colours to match those of the box art for the miniatures. However, since they come in pairs, I've also taken the liberty of giving my second Saboteur an urban camo design, like we explored for the Trandosians back in episode 8. These are the kind of units you could approach quite freely when planning your own colour schemes. Here's an overview of the painting stages. We'll begin by priming the miniature with a white primer. We'll then apply the base colours with extra care and patience, as some of the details are quite intricate. We'll then shade the miniature, and I'll be using some thinned shades for the light coloured clothing to achieve a slightly more subtle and gradual build-up of tone, which will then require little or no highlighting. We can then highlight the miniature, focusing primarily on the skin tone and the green accessories, before adding one or two final details such as the Rebel symbol on the left shoulder. Let's begin by applying the base colours. To capture the dull metallic finish of the gun and other bits of metallic detailing, I'm going to apply a base coat of equal parts Leadbelcher and Mechanicus Standard Grey. Some of these very small metallic clasps and panels don't need to be painted to achieve a good tabletop standard. I've also chosen to use this colour for all of the exposed cables and panels on the backpack. Once that's done, I'm going to paint the skin, which has an interesting turquoise hue, and I'm going to recreate this using an equal mix of Sybarite Green and Temple Guard Blue. As usual, we apply 2 or 3 thin layers to build up a nice solid tone. Next, I'm going to clean up the long-sleeved vest with some Ceramite White. And for the short-sleeved shirt, I'm using some Screaming Skull. For all of the green accessories, including the backpack, I'll be using Castellan Green. For the trousers, which we can't actually see in the character art, I've chosen the base colour of Stormvermin Fur, and you may have other ideas of your own. And finally, I've chosen to paint the boots dark grey, using a mix of Mechanicus standard grey and black. For my second saboteur, I've chosen to use the same urban camo design introduced in episode 8, which consists of a 3-tone pattern using white, Celestra Grey and Mechanicus standard grey. Once the base colours are complete, we're ready to do some shading. I'm going to begin by shading the skin with some Coelia Greenshade. And for the green accessories, we can apply some Athonian Camoshade. We can then use some Nuln Oil for the boots and all of the metallic accessories. For the trousers, I'm using an equal mix of Nuln Oil and Aggrax Earthshade. For the lighter parts of the miniature, I'm going to thin the shade to produce a more subtle build-up of depth. So, for the short-sleeved shirt, I'm going to use some Aggrax Earthshade, which I've thinned with an equal quantity of medium. The first layer of this can cover the entire area. Once dry, we can then add an additional layer or two just into the areas we want to be the darkest. We can take a similar approach with the white areas. This time I'm thinning some Nuln Oil with double the quantity of medium to produce a lighter, more subtle mix. This approach helps to give a smoother gradation from dark to light. And, because the lighter areas have only had one thinned layer, they won't need much highlighting, if any. Here I'm applying a second and a third layer into the underside of the arms and one or two other shadowed areas of white. I will also be using this to shade my camo design, once again adding additional layers to deepen the specific areas of shadow to my liking. With that done, we're ready to add some highlights. We're going to begin by highlighting the most important area of the miniature, the skin. I'm going to start with the original Sybarite Green and Temple Guard Blue mix, and I'm going to mix in a slightly smaller portion of Loren Forest. Keeping the paint reasonably thin and without overloading the brush, we can begin applying a broad layer of highlight, leaving the more bluish tone in the recesses untouched. The biggest challenge here is creating a smooth transition when highlighting the head. To achieve this, I'm thinning the paint even more than usual, to an almost glaze-like consistency. And I'm then drawing the paint upwards towards the brightest topmost part of the head. This is going to be the first of several layers, so we shouldn't worry too much if the tone is a little uneven at this stage. After painting one area, I'll move on to another, then return in a few minutes to apply a second or third layer. Here, I've realised I've possibly misinterpreted the cheekbone for part of the goggles. I'm then going to begin lightening the tone by mixing in some Nurgling Green. I'm now beginning my brush strokes a little higher up on the head, and I'm once again drawing the paint upwards, leaving the greater concentration of paint towards the top. In doing so, we're looking to create a smooth fading of the tone from the darker, more bluish tone at the bottom to the lighter, more greenish tone at the top. It's important not to overload the brush when working in this way, and getting the right amount of paint to cover the desired area can be a delicate balance. After applying a couple of layers of this, we can add additional quantities of the Nurgling Green for the lighter highlights. Although building up the highlights in multiple layers like this does require some patience, it's actually quite a forgiving way to work, as any unevenness in one layer will at least be partially obscured by the subsequent layers. Here, once again, you can see the paint being pulled up and released to accumulate at the top of the head, which we want to be the brightest area of highlight. Here, I've lightened the mix to an almost pure Nurgling Green. We can also use this to articulate the ridges in the forehead. Alongside the highlights, we can also apply a darker glaze to push the contrast a little further. For this, I'm thinning some Coelia Greenshade with some medium in a roughly 5:1 ratio. We can then use this to further darken the shadowed areas and, if necessary, to help smooth out the transitions. Notice that the cooler, more bluish tone of the shadows nicely complements the warmer, more yellowish tone of the highlights. I've now mixed in a little white to provide my final highlight, and I'm using this to emphasize a few expressive details such as the brow and facial details, as well as the knuckles on the hands. The next most important area in need of highlights is the green accessories. For that, I'm beginning with an equal mix of the original Castellan Green and some Loren Forest, although you could save time by jumping straight in with some pure Loren Forest here if you wish. I'm using this to highlight the entire top surface of the backpack. I'm then focusing more on the edges and applying a couple of thin layers to the flat areas on the back, but drawing the paint towards the edge where I want the brightest highlight to be. This can be done in a couple of layers to build up a subtle gradation. I'm also going to get my brush to each of the small details on the front of the miniature. We can then use some pure Loren Forest for the next highlight. I might still apply a thin layer of this to the top surface of the backpack, but really want to focus mostly on the edges and corners. Sometimes I might lay down a fairly solid highlight, like you can see on this edge here, then apply a more thinned layer to the surrounding area to help blend the layers together. For the smallest, brightest highlights, I'm mixing in a little Nurgling Green. The miniature now looks pretty good, and the remaining highlights could be considered optional if you're in a hurry to get your saboteur to the table. However, I've chosen to give just a few minimal highlights to the short-sleeved shirt with the original Screaming Skull. And I'm happy with the white shirt as it is. For the trousers, I'm going to reapply some Stormvermin Fur, placing particular emphasis on the raised ridges on the back of the legs and the knee area. I'm then going to lighten this further with the addition of a little Karak Stone. For the boots, a few small highlights with some Eshin Grey would be fine. Finally, for the metallic areas, I'm mixing some Karak Stone with some bright silver. For that, I'm using the new Stormhost Silver, but Runefang Steel or something similar would also be fine. Mixing in the Karak Stone dulls the metallic effect down and brings a subtle warmth to the highlight. Once we're happy with the highlights, we're ready to add some finishing touches. We're now going to add a few optional details to the miniature, starting with the lenses of the goggles. These appear just slightly lighter than the surrounding area, and I've chosen to give them a small hit with a mixture of Castellan Green and Leadbelcher. For the Rebel symbol on the left shoulder, I'm going to first smooth the area out with some Screaming Skull. I'm then using some Stormvermin Fur to firstly draw around the circumference of the patch. I'm then painting two small indents near the top of the circle, leaving the remaining Screaming Skull to approximate the shape of the Rebel symbol. Finally, I'm going to use some Evil Sunz Scarlet to paint a couple of the red lights we can see on some of the equipment being worn by the Saboteurs. I'm applying just two, one on the pack at the front of the miniature and one on the wristband. We can then paint the base or rebase the miniature entirely. And as usual, we protect the figures with a coat of matte varnish. As one final touch, I've also chosen to give the boots a thinned coat of gloss varnish, although a more muddied, weathered look would also work well. And this completes the Rebel Saboteurs. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy my work, then do please subscribe to the channel, and feel free to connect with me on Facebook, Twitter or Patreon, where you can help to support my work for as little as $1. As usual, my huge thanks go to the amazing patrons who are already supporting the work that I do. The channel will soon be undergoing some exciting improvements, all thanks to their ongoing generosity. Join me again soon, as we continue painting miniatures from Star Wars Imperial Assault. Happy painting!